Imagine this. You are on an isolated island in the middle of the ocean. The native inhabitants absolutely love one thing: coconuts. They can't get enough of coconuts. What's more, you own all of the coconut trees and have an absolute monopoly on the coconut trade. Far from being angered by this, the government on the island completely protects you, outlawing any competition from ever entering the marketplace. The explanation they give is that they don't want the people saturated with too many coconuts, and they want to protect the jobs of the people that you employ and all the taxes that you willingly pay. Think about how rich this would make you, and at how bad at business you would have to be to go bankrupt in these circumstances. I bet you couldn't manage it even if you were actively trying. Well, here in Australia, there is one company that has managed to climb this mountain of corporate incompetence: Star Entertainment Group. This is Australia. Australians are the biggest gamblers on earth by far, spending twice as much as those in the United States per capita and 3 times as much of those of nearby New Zealand. In the state of Queensland, one of Australia's most visited states, Star Entertainment enjoys a near monopoly on casino gambling, being the sole operator of casinos in the capital Brisbane and nearby Gold Coast. Across the border in New South Wales, Star Entertainment also owns the casino that sits in the middle of Darling Harbour, one of the most heavily touristed locations on the planet. For almost 30 years, Star Entertainment has enjoyed an absurdly protected position in the Australian gambling market. For instance, in New South Wales, Star is the only casino able to have electronic gaming machines, which in Australia remains the largest revenue raiser of all gambling types, while online casinos are completely outlawed nationwide. In many respects, Star's industry is even more lucrative than the aforementioned coconuts, since gambling requires very little stock, inventory, or supply chains. It's not affected by weather, transport, or commodity prices. It literally is just money exchanged for chips, which is handed back to the casino as gaming losses. And yet, at the time of recording, Star Entertainment has remained in a trading halt for over 2 weeks, having failed to submit its financial returns to the Australian Stock Exchange. Meanwhile, Star's executives are frantically trying, or rather begging, the governments of Queensland and New South Wales, banks and other investors for tax breaks, loans and cash injections to remain solvent. How is it possible that a company with this business environment is actually on the brink of collapse? Well, I'm Crispin, and here in this Poker Room Review special, we're going to tell the story of this singularly terribly run company, one of the worst in the entire history of the world, and how this former poker pro, Steve McMahon, has been parachuted in at the last minute as CEO to desperately try to find a way to save it. Well, Star Entertainment has operated its casinos in Australia since 1995. In June of 2011, Star Entertainment finally listed on the stock exchange, floating at $3.80 per share. After this, Star's share price steadily climbed, reaching an all-time high of $5.19 in December of 2017. Prior to this trading halt, Star Entertainment closed at 45 cents a share, 12% of its opening value, and losing more than 90% of its 2017 highs. Now, the problems for Star really began in 2018 when major consulting group KPMG produced a report for Star's executive team that showed its casinos were being used in a large-scale systematic money laundering operation that was supporting T-Group financing and run over a series of years by Chinese triads operating through junket intermediaries and high-flying gamblers. Pretty scary stuff. So let's play a game. Imagine that you are the CEO who receives this devastating report detailing widespread criminal activity in your publicly listed company. Do you A, robustly and furiously respond to the report's findings, notifying the government and criminal investigators as to what's going on, strengthening your own internal anti-money laundering detection regimes and compliance reporting? Perhaps you should also review your reward programs and contracts with third-party intermediaries to ensure your policies and commissions aren't incentivizing and rewarding criminal activity. Or B, do you scornfully dismiss the consultants as idiots, make a public showing of throwing away the findings and dismissing all of the recommendations while failing to engage or even reading the report? Anyway, then CEO Matt Berkier threw away the report and dismissed the findings, and oh, what do you know, in 2021, when Star's revenues had already been smashed through the global pandemic, a team of investigative journalists from multiple television stations and major newspapers uncovered a systematic money laundering operation occurring over a period of years at Star's major casinos. In response, the New South Wales gaming regulator announced they were appointing eminent lawyer Adam Bell SC to conduct an inquiry into Star Entertainment's suitability to hold a casino license following the revelation that Star executives had been expressly warned about what was happening but failed to do anything about it. This inquiry was far-reaching. The terms of reference included investigating everything from junket operators to game operations to identifying, support, and diversion for problem gamblers. In October the following year, the Bell report, as it came to be known, was handed down. Released in 3 volumes, it detailed damning evidence, concluding that Star Entertainment was in breach of its casino license and, critically, that Star Entertainment Group was not suitable to be operating a casino in New South Wales. Moreover, that this non-compliance was a direct consequence of an embedded dysfunctional culture and total indifference to money laundering risk. That's a quote. The Bell report handed down these findings with 30 recommendations that were all mandatory to fix Star's operations, while the Australian Securities and Investment Commission announced legal proceedings being taken against the then Star executive team for its persistent failings. Now imagine you are the next CEO of Star Entertainment when the Bell report is being published. Your company has been excoriated in the national press, the Australian public feel outraged and betrayed, and now other government jurisdictions have opened their own root and branch inquiries into your operations. Do you A, appear chastened and penitent before the government regulators who are forensically investigating your company and identifying major shortfalls? Do you make every commitment to assiduously implement all recommendations, employ organisational experts to drive cultural change, and independent auditors to monitor progress? What about your own behaviour as CEO? Leading by example, making changes where you can, humbling yourself through the press to show a sceptical public that Star Entertainment is mending its ways and is restoring its social licence to operate. Or B, illegally hack the private communications of government-appointed administrators and conspire to open a class action lawsuit against the regulator, literally the only entity on the planet with the legal authority to shut your operations down. Anyway, both the new CEO, Rob Cook, and then Chairman David Foster were caught hacking private communications of the government-appointed administrator and conspiring to sue the regulator. In response, the New South Wales government immediately imposed the maximum possible penalty of $100 million, declaring that these people will never hold a casino licence in that state. Meanwhile, the New South Wales government reappointed its administrator for a further 2 years and announced a second major inquiry into Star's operations. The Queensland government across the border also decided to impose its own penalty of $100 million for good measure. Anyway, these now former CEOs and chairmen were called before public hearings and unceremoniously turfed out of their positions after giving disastrous testimony. Then on 30th of August 2024, the second New South Wales report handed down its findings. As damning as the first, the second inquiry found that Star had falsified its responsible gambling data and that many of the previous review recommendations had not been implemented, and that Star management team remained, quote, strident and confrontational towards the government regulator. The second report came up with 5 additional mandatory requirements on top of the previous ones that were already outstanding. And yet, as bad as things are in New South Wales, by comparison to what's happening across the border in Queensland, everything in New South Wales seems okay. You see, in Queensland in 2019, Star Entertainment announced a new mega project, the Queen's Wharf Entertainment Complex. In May of 2020, Star announced they had secured $1.6 billion in bank financing for the project, with 50% funded by Star Entertainment and another 25% by Hong Kong-based Chow Tai-Fook and his Far East Consortium. Now that's an important name, we're going to come back to that later. Anyway, the financing was secured for 5.5 years with the expectation that the Queen's Wharf complex would open in 2022 with the money fully repaid after 3 further years of operation. I guess you can see where this might be going. It soon became obvious that the Queen's Wharf complex would miss its construction deadlines, and then by 2023, when already a year overdue and $1 billion over budget, the developer Multiplex and staff found themselves embroiled in a Supreme Court legal battle over who was contractually responsible for the continued delays and cost overruns. While fighting this expensive protracted legal battle, Star wasn't making any revenue to pay back its increasingly impatient creditors. But at least the construction itself is impressive. Inspired by the Marina Sands Bay in Singapore, the Queen's Wharf Entertainment Complex is monumental in scale. It spans 12 hectares along the main river waterfront, boasting luxury hotels, dozens of bars and restaurants, a convention centre, live theatre venues, a magnificent sky deck, and of course, a large casino. In August of 2024, 2 full years late, and again, $1 billion over budget, Queen's Wharf finally opened its doors, this time to a 20% leased occupancy rate. In fact, one of the flagship retail outlets that was going to bring in Louis Vuitton and all the upmarket brands has also pulled out and is suing Star Entertainment for millions and millions of dollars for alleged breaches of its lease agreement. Meanwhile, several things are happening in the political world and the broader economy that is making this a falling star. First, with spiraling inflation, the Reserve Bank has risen interest rates sharply from their historic pandemic lows, with Star's loan repayments for the massively overpriced Queen's Wharf ballooning exponentially and seem impossible to repay. To stave off default, they sold their previous casino property, a stunning Georgian architecture-style heritage building right in the middle of Brisbane, which was supposed to be for $248 million to Chatham Corporation, but that fell through, so the building was sold to a local university for a mere $67 million to raise urgent cash. While this has given them a sum of liquidity, Star is still short around $300 million of where it is supposed to be at this time in 2024, with around $450 million still currently owed to creditors such as Macquarie, Deutsche Bank, Washington H, Soul Pattinson, Perpetual and Regal Partners. So far, banks have balked at providing short-term funding for the hopelessly mismanaged project unless the Queensland government also steps in to provide guarantees and further tax incentives that can convince the banks that this is an acceptable risk. The Queensland government has indicated potentially providing some assistance, not wanting the embarrassment of seeing such a vaunted major project close its doors just weeks after opening, and the 1,500 job losses that would go with it. There's also the awkward fact that Brisbane is scheduled to host the 2032 Olympic Games, and is no doubt counting on the Queen's Wharf development to bring in huge tax receipts with its 4 luxury hotels to offset the monumental cost of those games. Unfortunately for both Star Entertainment and the Queensland government, 2 big things are holding back a deal. The first is that the New South Wales government was quick to rule out any assistance. A, they're not idiots and know that all the financial benefit would flow across the border to Queensland and the Queen's Wharf development, but also because, for the reasons outlined above, Star's executives have really pissed them off. Meanwhile, gambling harm is a hot button political topic right now in the Australian Parliament. A large majority of Australians have been calling on the federal government to ban outright sports betting advertising on TV out of fears that it has become completely normalised among young people, with harrowing stories of homelessness, crime, substance abuse, domestic abuse and self-deletion fanning the airwaves. With gambling harm looming large in the consciousness of a deeply sensitive Australian electorate, the thought of bailing out casinos too big to fail with taxpayer money, led by executives who are not exactly corporate citizens of the year, is about as politically popular as promising to introduce a puppy poisoning endowment fund. Overhanging all of this is a reduction in gambling spend generally as high rollers take their business elsewhere and local punters are squeezed by high inflation and rising costs of living. And remember that Hong Kong Far East Consortium and how they coughed up 25% of the funds needed for Star's development? Well, it turns out they gave the Queensland government a probity report as part of their purchase, which evidently the Queensland government didn't actually read, rubber stamping the approval to rescue the Queen's Wharf development that was already in trouble. That report reached the hands of the major national newspaper, Sydney Morning Herald, but before the Herald could publish its findings, the Queensland government tipped off the consortium, who in turn sought and received an injunction from a court to stop its publication. Allegedly, the property report directly exposes links between the Firest Consortium and the very people whose money laundering operations had landed Star Entertainment in hot water in the first place. No doubt the Queensland government realised that any bailout of the failing Queen's Wharf complex would be absolutely impossible if the public ever actually saw what the allegations were and what the report contained. But as it turned out, the Firest Consortium did also approach the New South Wales regulator asking to become a major shareholder through the ASX of Star Entertainment Group. But they withdrew their application when they found out the purchase would be subject to further probity checks of their company before they could increase their stake. This does seem damning. To be fair to that company, they do deny that this is the reason they withdrew their application, instead saying politely that Star Entertainment Group business is, well, trash. And now, given this trading hold is weeks long, how much is this company actually worth today? Well, right now, nothing, because the trading hold remains in effect. But at the time of recording, the New South Wales government sent Star Entertainment another show cause notice in the wake of the second inquiry findings, promising to fine Star yet another $100 million on top of the $200 million that have already been imposed. So the New South Wales government has even started musing publicly that Star Entertainment Group might go under, talking up the contingency plans they have in place if it does. So, where does this all leave the new poker-playing CEO Steve McMahon hired to save Star from collapse? Well, McMahon was previously at Crown and oversaw the sale to Blackstone for what was then an astronomically inflated price of $8.9 billion. Back then, McMahon was seen as a miracle worker. However, then the situation was markedly different. Interest rates were still at record lows, and the extent of adverse findings against Australian casinos had not yet made themselves evident. And also, Crown did not have massive unpayable debts. None of this is applicable here, however. Overseeing a company with negative cash flow, poor relations with regulators and the public, multiple lawsuits, looming additional fines, worsening economic crisis and an imposing trading halt, it's hard to see Star Entertainment surviving the current crisis. And if it does go under, given its unparalleled monopoly advantages, then Star Entertainment must surely go down as the worst run company in history. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.